And
before we begin,
introducing the
we're going to see a short audio-visual. Keith Jones
presentation that
is going to show a brief slideshow.
Will show to us.
For them, we continue struggling for truth and justice and memory. Our first guest is Adriana Portillo Bartow. She's a survivor of the war in Guatemala and a human rights activist. On September 11th in 1981, her father, stepmother, sister-in-law, her baby sister Almita of 18 months of age, and her daughters Chawita and Glenda of 10 and 9 years respectively, were kidnapped and disappeared by the security forces of the Guatemalan state. For more than 35 years, Adriana has struggled tirelessly to bring the military men responsible for such a horrendous crime to justice with all the force of the law, and to find out the truth about the whereabouts of her loved ones. Adriana, thank you for this opportunity, Alicia. And perhaps first of all, I should give you a little bit of context in which 6 members of my family were kidnapped. In 1980 and 81, 82 and 83, in fact, all the way through to 1984, these were the years in which the war was really raging in Guatemala. My family, my siblings, my brothers, and my father belonged to an organization that was a revolutionary organization that existed at the time. And I was doing political education work in my community. One day, my father came to the town where I lived so that we could reach agreement on a little party that we were going to have on September 12th in the capital city where he lived. That day was a Thursday. It was Thursday, September the 10th. And my father went back to the capital city, and with him, he took his little daughter, my mother and my stepmother, and I sent my 2 daughters with him so that when I got there the next day with my sister-in-law, it wouldn't be so hard to take all of my children. When I got there the next day, at approximately at 2 in the afternoon, immediately I realized that the whole block where my father lived was surrounded by security forces of the Guatemalan government. My sister-in-law and I approached the place and we were questioned. I was questioned specifically And I don't know how long that questioning lasted. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 20 minutes, it could have been an hour, I don't know. Because really you lose track of sense of time in a situation like this. We were surrounded by police and soldiers, agents of the Sixth Command, the judicial police, the intelligence arm of the army, and they asked me questions, and they were playing with us psychologically. They were saying, oh, your father's inside. Oh, no, he's not inside. Maybe you crossed paths. In the end, we realized they weren't going to give us any information. And so we left. And to this day, I do not understand what happened that day, why they didn't stop us, but they let us go. In the news that same day, I saw that the spokesperson of the army was saying that they had found a guerrilla safe house and that there was nobody in the house. I can attest that yes, my stepmother was in that house, my sister-in-law was in that house, Almita, my little sister, was there, and my 2 daughters. And I believed that my father was there as well. But then I realized that my father had been taken from his workplace. Apparently, there were 2 simultaneous operations that happened. We never knew anything more about what happened to any of them. It is truly difficult, but it becomes even more painful when you realize that you're not the only person, you're not the only mother, the only daughter, the only sister who has lost a family member. The war in Guatemala ended with the signing of the peace accords in 1996 in December. And with that signature, there was a space that opened up for family members of the disappeared, family members of people who had been killed in the war, and the Truth Clarification Commission realized that they did their investigation and they found that more than 200,000 men, women, and children had been killed in the war. And approximately 47,000 people were disappeared. Of those people, 11% of them were girls and boys, children. And until now, perhaps they've only been able to find about 600 of them out of almost 6,000 disappeared girls and boys during the war. I live in exile. I've been here in the United States for many years now, but my search from afar here and also in Guatemala when I was able to return after the peace accords has not stopped. I am seeking justice, I'm seeking truth, and I need to find out what happened. I'm also looking for my daughters through people who perhaps have seen them in various places. One person told me he knew where the girls were, but that I had to give him $12,000 in order to have information. So many things have happened that have made it especially difficult. But we haven't stopped looking for truth and for justice, and we haven't stopped looking for my girls. In 1998, a little more than a year after the signing of the peace accords in Guatemala, we presented the first case in Guatemala before the public ministry. We denounced the crime, we made many statements, and from the very beginning, the public prosecutors in charge of the case did everything possible to keep the case from moving forward in the public ministry. The first person who had charge of the case, what he did was to ask for amnesty for the government officials who were accused of the kidnapping and disappearance of my family members. And until now, from 98 until now, the case has moved very little. There's been very little progress on it. And the file that was in the hands of the public ministry was lost, strangely. Then they said they found it, but they put some documents that belonged to another case on top of it that had something to do with weapons. And the last time, they put it in a safe in the Tower of Justice in a building there. And suddenly the file appeared again, and my brother and I were able to give our statements before a judge. But the strange thing is that the judge is the sister of a military man who was in the army in the worst years of the war in Guatemala. So the case came to a grinding halt again, and we weren't able to move forward. And so it was extremely hard to find out what had actually happened that day. What I have been left with is the search for the girls through other means and other channels. As I was saying, many people have tried to manipulate my pain. And here I am today, and I'm still searching. There is an organization that was founded in Guatemala in 1984, which is called the Mutual Support Group, GUM. And it was founded by family members of disappeared people. I lived in Guatemala in 1984, and I was very afraid to go to this group and to join in with the other families. It was in the later years that I was able to join GUM, and through them, we're looking for justice and truth for my disappeared family. I think I don't need to explain what it feels like to have a family member or several family members, many of them disappeared. In my opinion, disappearances are the most perfect form of torture, because there is no body, nobody knows anything. And the only thing that we're left with are birth certificates. In my case, that's what I have to show that my daughters existed. The few photos that I have and their birth certificates that I was able to take from the country when we left. It is a pain. Maybe I'll say it this way. A lot of people have told me that I should leave the past behind, that I shouldn't subject myself to so much suffering as if I were the one that were responsible for what happened to my daughters. People say a lot of things. And the truth is, I'm sure that there are other family members just like me who go to bed every night thinking about our loved ones. We wake up every morning thinking about them. Any smell, a flower, a bird, a toy might bring them to our memory again. But in spite of the pain that we feel, there's something in us, at least in most of us, that makes us say we are never going to stop looking for them. We're never going to give up our search for justice. We're never going to give up on our search for truth. And we will die, some of us who are older. I was 28 years old when my girls were disappeared. And now many years have gone by, and there's not as much time left to live, but I will never stop looking for them. And if it's not me, my other daughters will look for them. And if it's not them, my granddaughters will look for them. I just want to tell everyone who is part of this forum not to get discouraged. Let's keep moving forward, as painful as it is. And I admire all of you in your search for justice and truth.
Thank you. A strong hug for you. Thank you for sharing this with us and for your testimony. It was so moving, and for your struggle, which is an example. Our next participant is Anahí Junquera. She is a member of the regional group HIJOS Bahía Blanca, which is part of the international, the national network of HIJOS. Should be on the screen so people can, the international network, which is formed by in different regions of the country of Argentina. And this year is turning 25 years since it was formed. HIJOS is an acronym that means Sons and Daughters for Identity and Justice Against the Loss and Silence. These are daughters and sons of political participants from unions and students, victims of terror from the state and of the dictatorship. They fight for justice and punishment for genocides in the search for restitution, for the identity of brothers and sisters, in order to vindicate the struggles of 30 detained and disappeared persons in order to reconstruct the collective memory. They're also part of an international network of this organization. I would like to clarify also something very personal, is that Anahí is like my niece. Her parents, Nestor and Mari, were like my brothers and sisters, my best friends in my years of adolescence, when I was 16 and 17 years of age. And Anahí, we give you welcome, and we are active to listen to you. Thank you, Alicia. Before anything, I want to gratitude for this opportunity, for calling forth this meeting. It's very interesting, and it's new for those of us who are accustomed to do this type of activity. So it's bilingual, and that allows interpretation. And want to thank the university for this opportunity. So for the participants who are here, we can share a little bit. I was listening attentively what Adriana was sharing with us just now, and the experience of life, and beyond her particular case, these feelings that all of our grandparents, all of us survivors, family members, and in the cases where there are family members who've been disappeared. It's a feeling, it's a way of crossing barriers, because everything that Adriana said was like listening to one another here in Argentina when we talk about ourselves, amongst ourselves, as family members or with friends and companions. It's impactful, and so I want to send you a hug from down here, from the Bahía Blanca in the south of Argentina. The formation of the group, the region of Bahía Blanca, as Alicia said, we are part of this national network, and this was created in different regions around the country. Bahia is the farthest one in the south, and based on the type of questions that we're focusing on here, it's the group that made sense. It was born in the 90s when we were in full state of impunity. We were a little bit grown, let's say, learning a little bit about the mothers and the grandmothers from the Plaza de Mayo. And they were making this effort to search for the time of their family members during the dictatorship, and they realized that there could be other things, and so that's how these human rights organizations came forward in Argentina, and they represent for the entire world a point of reference for human rights. And Argentina has a strong work of struggling for human rights. And we've been able to learn a lot at the social and institutional level. We've learned from them in the 90s in this pure impunity, and we had come out of the 80s with a democracy. In 84, the CONADEP was formed, the National Commission for the Search of Disappeared Persons, and there was a complete investigation that connected with families and survivors who had been in these clandestine situations, and all of this was carried to that was brought to justice, a trial rather, where people from the cupola, the head of the military junta, were the first ones who were tried, but it was the first step. And then we were on this journey continuing for justice, because there were military uprisings that took down the democratic government, and there was the period of impunity, and this means that we couldn't continuing to struggle for the causes that we were fighting for, and we couldn't have judgments through a process with the intermediate commanders or inferior commanders in the military hierarchy. So that's more or less a quick overview. And so these laws of impunity came up, and the processes of judgment and trials. And then there was a mandate from Menem, which came to bring to a close these impunity laws, and this created an opportunity to, we were dealing with the neoliberal political policies that started to restore another dictatorship. And with this situation, we were working, and it wasn't just talking about there's a well-known person who was on the television, and they were on this, just walking around the streets, and so that's how this grouping, this organization came together. We had passed adolescence, and we were more adult, and this was in 1995. In Bahía Blanca, we called it, there was no internet, there was no chat, there weren't cell phones. So things are a little bit more delayed. And the bases were clear. It's the letters, HIJOS stands for Sons and Daughters for Identity and Justice, and this is the basic point, that we were looking for restitution of our brothers and sisters who were and also to vindicate the militancy of our family members, companions. And this was a personal issue, because I'm referring, there wasn't this type of militancy before. There had been, it was there had just been 12 years of democracy when we got started, and so it had to do with these times where we wanted to retake this militancy. And since there weren't any trials, so we started to have actions, and we were working in different neighborhoods, and meeting with people in their homes, and talked to people who had been supported by Menem, and this gave rise to some investigations, and we worked hard to create organizing to go through the neighborhoods and explaining to people, all the neighbors, what was genocide, and this was also an opportunity to talk to them about denouncements, and we had artistic activities, and this political connection and with the arts was one of the things that made us unique. It was like one fact that we could make clear. And then there's the government of Nestor Kirchner in 2013. And we took up all of the work of the human rights organizations. And this is the first time that we were hearing the human rights organizations with the open doors at the Pink House, just like the White House in the United States. And it was a very symbolic moment of paying attention to the genocides, and it marked the beginning of a pathway of a new phase of our work on memory of and justice. And so in 2014, they eliminated these rules, and we had a Supreme Court case that allowed us to reopen the cases and of human rights abuses throughout the country. And this was a long journey, and we shared this story, all of the historical aspects, and all of the things that had been part of our struggle through the different governments. And I use this as a metaphor or an image. In the 80s, when the causes were beginning to happen, and those strugglers were our grandparents, but many of them had passed away. So we were the ones that picked up the role as organizations, and many of us were moving things forward. And after so many years, we were reopening the cases to investigate them again. We needed to learn everything about the judicial process, the terminology. We learned law. We learned about communication. We did a tremendous amount of work to be what we were in order to bring forward these cases. And also what had happened, this impunity that was that people of our family were dead, and many family members and victims had died over this long period of time. And it was from 2005 to now, it has been a long process. Historically, it's short, but we've gone through many phases. And in terms of the policies of the state, and what we can say is that there are programs that accompany victims, and this happened after the disappearance of a militant in 2006 who was a victim of state terrorism, and in the last day they was disappeared. And this was a very harsh reality for us, particularly for those of us who were moving through this movement of time with the judgments. And we were also trying to ensure that there was accompaniment for the victims. And in this whole process, the sexual crimes were taken as individual crimes and outside of human rights frame of reference, but rather it was a systematic methodology. And how much time do I have left?
Un minuto.
So I'm going to finish up, but this is very important. It has to do with Argentina and this path of memory and justice. We are a reference in the country, and we want to talk about the sexual crimes within this category as fundamental for all countries, not just here. And what's happening now, we have so much work to do, that we've done rather. We started to work on human rights policies, specifically with the trials. There were many I said it was going to be short, but I have a small summary. And now we know that 72% of the genocides have been with home incarceration, and this in the time of neoliberal politicians from 2015 to the end of 2018. In these processes, which we are now in the midst of a pandemic, we have 28 trials that are in process, and there's so much more to do. And for example, there are, when we talk about the judgments about the responsibility of the officials, and when we talk about the real powers, it's very difficult. And to close, what I think is really important in this path that Argentina has been on in terms of as a movement and an organization working on human rights, is that now we have an organized generation, and these are the grandchildren. They're our daughters and sons, and they call themselves that, and they continue this struggle, which we have been working on since we were children, and now our children continue. And that's all. Thank you. I have so many things.
Thank you so much, Anahí. Now, I don't know how you can clap on Zoom. Should we clap? Should we snap? I'm not quite sure. Thank you very much, Anahí. And now we're going to hear from Malu Garcia Andrade. Malu was born in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, in Mexico on March 31st, 1979. She's the daughter of a teacher, Norma Esther Andrade. And Malu is the oldest of two of Norma's daughters. Malu's sister is named Lilia Alejandra Garcia Andrade, and she was born August 31st of 1983. In February of 2001, Lilia Alejandra, Malu's sister, was kidnapped and murdered. Months later, her mother Norma, along with Alejandra's teacher, founded the organization We Want Our Daughters Back Home. In 2003, Malu joined the call for justice of dozens of families in that time who were looking to make more visible the murder of women that was happening in Ciudad Juárez in Chihuahua, Mexico. Since then, Malu has been an activist and a human rights defender and has dedicated her life to the search for truth and justice in the case of femicides and disappearances of women in Mexico. Malu? Great, you have the floor. Well, thank you so much, Alicia, for inviting me. It's such an honor to share with other surviving families about the experiences that they've had. Their experiences aren't that different from the experiences that we've had in Mexico. I'm going to begin to tell the story about how we got involved in this issue of femicides and disappeared women. And with Alicia, we started in this struggle when my sister was killed in February of 2001. And after we were demanding justice in the case of my sister, we began to meet other families who had also lost their daughters and others who were disappeared. Families who had been looking for their daughters since 1993, 95, 98, looking for justice. When we began looking for justice and demanding justice, we realized at first that there were several factors at play. The main thing was that there was no political will on the part of the authorities, in this case the state of Chihuahua, to investigate the disappearance and the murders of these women. After a while, Ciudad Juárez became famous for all of the women who had been murdered there. And people weren't using the word femicide yet, but years later, and after my mother and another sister, Marisela Ortiz, we went looking for support from international human rights organizations like Amnesty International, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, the European Parliament, and other human rights organizations from other countries to be able to get out the word about what was happening in Ciudad Juárez. At that time, as I mentioned, femicide wasn't even used as a term. We didn't have a law to report specific disappearances of women. We didn't have a genetic laboratory in Chihuahua. And when there were these kinds of homicides, we had to send evidence to other entities in the country. And so the processes lasted a long time, evidence was lost, and so on. There was a lot of omission on the part of the authorities, evidence was lost, and so the struggle was really focused on getting out the word of what was happening in Ciudad Juárez and Chihuahua. We were asking for the support from the federal authorities to have resources for our organization in Chihuahua to be able to really attend to femicides. And so we were able to make the problem visible nationally and internationally. So Marcela Lagarre and other Congress people started using the word femicide to what was happening. And they began to struggle to begin the struggle to call it femicide and to treat it as something really different. The cases of femicide increased all over the country, not just in Ciudad Juárez, but all over the country. And there were other places where things were actually worse than in Ciudad Juárez. For us, the families, it's been quite difficult. The most famous case is the case of Maricel Escobedo, where the authorities and the people who are behind these crimes actually threaten the family members who are looking for justice and truth in the cases of their family members who are murdered or disappeared. Many of us have had to move from place to place because of the threats. My mother had an attempt against her life. I did also. And we're far away from the city where we were born, where we grew up, and where we have the rest of our family. It's very difficult for us in that sense. And because you have to start from zero, you have to keep fighting. Because in 2001, the authorities could say, well, we don't have a DNA lab, we don't have a trained personnel, we don't have resources to be able to deal with these crimes. But now they do have those resources. And currently, they do have the resources. In 2008, femicide was listed as a specific crime. And in Ciudad Juárez, there was a lot of talk about femicide, but they didn't really talk about the disappeared women. What was happening with the women who just disappeared and never showed up again? So we started to document the cases of disappeared women as well, and to link those cases with organized crime, human trafficking, military networks. And that's where I realized that disappearances of women, or even anybody, were also not listed as a specific kind of crime. So that when somebody would go to report the disappearance of a daughter, it was treated as a complaint because your child was absent or had run away, but it wasn't treated as a crime. And so lawyers and human rights activists started denouncing, wanted to denounce the public officials for negligence in these cases. Why? Because they acted as if we were just placing a complaint. And for many years, we were trying to put this issue on the table, both in Ciudad Juárez and nationally and internationally, so that the disappearance of persons at the hands of particular people should be called a crime, a specific kind of crime. So a forced disappearance by the military or by public servants, not by just anyone. There is a big gap in the laws, loopholes that benefit public officials and military people so that investigations are not done. Fortunately, we were able to make the issue of disappeared women visible as well, and we were able to fight on this issue. In Ciudad Juárez, we were the first organization, Let's Bring Our Daughters Home was the name of the organization, that was recognized. And we were able to recognize a case of human trafficking, a person who disappeared and was trafficked. A few years ago, the problem got worse, not just women who were disappeared, but all kinds of people disappearing. There's more than 100,000 people who have disappeared in our country now. And so national organizations started another struggle to recognize people who are being disappeared, not by government officials, but by other entities, private groups. So the typification of femicide as a crime continues to be, it's not typified as a crime precisely because of the negligence of and the lack of political will on the part of our government officials. Our president has put great feminists in his cabinet and in the Secretariat of the Interior, and he says he's dealing with the issue. However, we have never been able to get a meeting between the family members of the disappeared with the president. Families who, and it doesn't matter where they are, the public servants, the prosecutor's offices, continue to say no, and they continue to refuse to investigate these crimes with a gender perspective. We have judges who have come out with decisions where instead of trying something for femicide, they try it for intentional homicide. And what that means is that there's a great reduction in the numbers of femicide. And so the president can go out on television and say, oh, we don't have femicide because these cases aren't called femicide. And why don't we have cases? It's because we have judges who don't want to treat cases as femicide. And so the public servants are continuing to refuse to deal with the issue. Our biggest obstacle is that it's hard to build awareness among citizens and organizations, but we can do that. The hardest thing is to create awareness among public servants. If we don't have judgments and sentences of public officials for negligence and corruption and omission, we're going to continue to have public servants who are inhumane, who don't do their job, who treat the family members wrong, who re-victimize survivors, and all of this because of lack of political will on the part of the authorities. As I mentioned before, we have been displaced and we've had to live in other places, and a lot of families in Ciudad Juárez have denounced cases in the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, and they've had to do that because the Mexican government itself is violating human rights and not taking up these cases. And so in 3 of the cases went to the Inter-American Human Rights Court, from the commission to the court. And so the whole world has heard about the judgment of Campo Adone, and that was a precedent. It left a precedent in an Inter-American court, and the Mexican government was tried and found guilty of impunity in this case. But those cases, even those who have been who have gone through the Inter-American Human Rights Courts have not advanced. We still don't have the names of those responsible parties. So what needs to happen? We need to recognize the disappearance of women. We need to have alerts to be immediately activated and not wait 72 hours, as the authorities have been saying. We need to have an Amber Alert in the media, in the prosecutor's offices, and other offices that look for missing people. But while we have authorities that don't want to work and don't have the political will to move on these cases, it doesn't really matter what kinds of laws we have, because we were going to continue exactly the way we are, with huge amount of negligency and impunity on the part of the Mexican government. I've always said that we should have judgments, but we should be trying public servants, public officials, because of their negligence and their omission. If we don't have any sanctions and judgments against these public officials, the next public official is going to think twice before, or if we do have some judgments, the next person will think twice before they decide to just ignore our cases. Thank you very much.
So much inspiration for us, for each and all of us. And so now we would like to give the mic to Adriana Metz. She's the daughter of Graciela and Raúl Eugenio Metz, and the older sister of a baby who was born in captivity in the Escuelita, a concentration camp where I was with her mother in Bahía Blanca. Adriana is mother of two by her desire and her selection, and she was born in Bahía Blanca, and she is a member of the Abuelas of the Plaza de Mayo, Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo. And Adriana is a very strong connection because I am a witness of the birth of her brother, who now, after several decades, we continue looking for. I say he's my adopted godson. Adriana, we are here to hear you. Good afternoon, good evening to each of you. In this presentation, when I wrote it, I was thinking about this, that who am I, how am I? And to define myself as a daughter of, an older sister of, and mother of two, and from the Bahia, and that's a lot. 8 years ago, I became a member of the Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo. I grew with my paternal grandparents, and they continue being my grandparents. And we have 34 cousins. These are my grandparents, and the others, well, they'll forgive me. We don't have any struggles in the house. I'm going to say this. These are my grandparents. And in the search for each of these people, and there's particular stories, is a story of all of us. Because if my parents were sequestered and later disappeared, they're part of a society, not just disappeared, but friends of work and others who were disappeared. It's not just my parents who were disappeared. And it's not just 2, but it's 30,000. And to be in a human rights organization now, the Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, it's part of my history. I grew with my grandparents. I learned from them. And sometimes they ask me, what do my parents say to me about my parents being disappeared? And they said it was natural, as though it were natural, even though there's nothing natural about it, that your parents be disappeared. It wasn't traumatic. What was traumatic was that I didn't cry. That when they told me, I knew that they were taken away, and my anger wasn't with my parents or grandparents or the policy. It was with the military, with the dictatorship, with a very specific group who took over power, and they were my parents were these people were disappeared. And it was a time in our culture where love could end up with sorrow and burying somebody. And there are people who we continue looking for. I cry because, and sometimes it's easy to talk about this and other times it's not. When I think of the history of my parents, I couldn't ask them directly what happened, who they were, how they were. There are many people who knew them. And when they were telling me, it wasn't because I asked for it, but because it came up. And putting this story together with all the puzzle and finding the pieces and how to connect them, it's difficult to put it together. So there's my brother, who's my younger brother, one who I could not give a hug to or play with, I couldn't fight with or defend. But I realized that this topic of the searching is a collective searching. And for this, when I lived with my grandparents, is what I was constantly engaged with. We working with this organization to look for them, the babies who were robbed by the dictatorship. It wasn't, they were never given over, they were taken away. And when I realized that this search, it couldn't be a passive process, and I got closer to the people who are most clear about this, which is the grandparents. So I approached the filial, and in June or July of 2012, I started to work with the grandmothers, and I was doing public communications. It wasn't something I knew, but I had to do it. I had to learn quickly. It was necessary, and that's how I got in my first work with and in the first assembly that I attended, is an organization, a nonprofit or a non-governmental organization. There's an assembly, there's voting, and I participated in this gathering. And at one point, I got to know Esther de Cartello, and she said to me, "How good it is. It's great to see you." And I said, "Well, that I learned, and I'm learning, and I learned from the best, my grandparents." And she told me, or she answered me, they taught you, but you could have chosen something different. So it was great that I was there. And in the time that I've been working with abuelas, the grandmothers, I've been in schools telling my personal story, explaining what the abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, the grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo, is about. And it's easier to tell this story, to tell their story than to tell mine, because I find myself with my throat all tightened and tears in my eyes. But in explaining the struggle is collective, and as those who've already spoken and those who will speak, we all understand you can't do this alone. The work, the struggle, and demanding our rights is a collective process. That's what I have to share. You can't do it alone. And when there was a sentence in Bahia, after many years of impunity in 2012, there was the first sentencing, and many people were accused of the taking of my brother. I felt in that moment that judgment was present. And 40 years later, but it was present, and the struggle was to find my brother. We continue with the same journey of the search. But if I were to think that I'm not going to find him, I would not be doing this. I wouldn't continue the search without receiving calls and consultations from people from the 1975 and 1980 and who knew about his identity. If I were to think that I'm not going to find him, I don't know what I would do. I can't allow this into my head. Is it in the possibility? Yes, of course. I can't stop looking for him. And in particular, my grandparents, my grandmother in particular said this, we want to know where my brother is, where this baby now is 43 years old. He's an adult. Of 43 years of age. Maybe he's hearing us now. Maybe he's a soccer game or doesn't know that he was born in a clandestine space, and they deprived him of knowing his story, his history, his family, which is not just a biological matter. and that's having 34 cousins. It's an important number. It would be a very complicated. We couldn't have this gathering during the pandemic, but these are the thoughts that we have as a family once we know where the son is of Graciela and Raul. This is the majority of people who knew my grandparents and who've been involved in this struggle. My grandfather in 92 and my grandmother in 94. I lived with them until 89, and I'm gonna be 31 years in Mar del Plata, but I always see myself as from the Bahía Blanca. This is the where the armed forces are in one small space with a communication that is, it makes things complicated, dirty, but for me, Bahia is a city that I love because there I meet really wonderful people and they make me feel loved. So, and this is very important. I'm sorry, I didn't think I was going to get so emotional. And now I'm telling you, you need to stop talking, but I'm not there to give you a hug. So this is a very big problem. I came ready. I came ready. It's difficult. You want to finish here? You want to say anything else? I was so much, I wanted to say a lot, but there's not so much. To go from the United States to there would be wonderful. And maybe you can come and we can cry. A hug, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adriana.
And now the last presentation of this evening is also very moving. It's a presentation by Verónica De Negri. Oops, I'm going to have to change channels because I'm going to present this one in English.
No hagas nada. Please don't do anything weird now because we don't want to lose you. We have everything organized. Verónica De Negri is a Chilean human rights activist who survived disappearance, torture, and imprisonment in a concentration camp during the Pinochet dictatorship. She has spoken about human rights issues on every continent and to thousands of audiences, including schools, colleges, universities, churches, civic associations, and human rights groups. De Negri's life has been devoted to search for justice for all victims of state violence, including those victims of enforced disappearances, summary executions, and all human rights abuses wherever they are committed. In addition to her lectures, De Negri has created arpillera workshops. Arpilleras are these tapestries, like the one I have behind me. Arpilleras workshops, and has taught to groups of many ages and backgrounds, including young girls at risk, through the Union Institute, college students at Loyola Marymount University, and the general public at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival on the National Mall, among many other places. Veronica, we're gonna listen to you now.
I guess I will start by the end. Listening Adriana Metz, I was thinking, yes, I'm 75 years old and 47 years struggling for justice after the coup d'etat because my tragedy started during the coup d'etat. many things happened. I was exonerated. I was working in the government, um, in public work and transportation. I was doing studies of transportation, and I was exonerated. Years after, in 1976, I was arrested. And on 77, I came to exile. I was not allowed to return to the country until after the so-called new democracy of Chile. I say so-called because for me, it was the continuation of the dictatorship with some variations, but that's what it was. I would say that the time that I was arrested was not easy. I live all kind of things, like, by example, as a mother, I have two kids. One is my son, Rodrigo, which was burned alive in 1986. And my son, Pablo, that was 15 months old when I was arrested. Rodrigo was not with me because he was visiting the family in Canada, where I was in exile at that moment. And when I was arrested, he was completely out of the chance to return to the country. And at that time, as a militant, I was very, they were looking for things, but you know, if you read the history of Chile and the coup d'etat, were many false stories to give the coup. And I was abused, accused first of trafficking of arms, of all kind of nonsense, all created. But the worst part was that I didn't know that two aunts, sisters of my father, denunciated me because they were with interest to get the house where we live. So I know it's very sad. I discovered that many years after, at the end of the 90s. And it was I guess it was the first time that I was able to cry after Rodrigo's death. But during my arrest, I was raped, not just by men. I was raped also with rat, which is something that I cannot overcome. I have been working in many different ways to overcome that. I also practice I have to be having the hysterectomy because I didn't want to feel that rat in my body because I keep feeling it. And I thought that was gone. But a few years ago, came back again. And I think the reason that came back is because justice is not being done, not just to me, also to my son. Even in the case of my son, I have finally the first judgment. It's a long story. My son was burned alive by 33 soldiers. They denied that. But he was not burned alive alone. There was a girl with him. She survived. And unfortunately, instead to be close to work together. She took the other side. And she got involved with what we call the sapos, the men from the intelligence of the army. And she's married with him now. He has 3 daughters. She also has a doctorate degree. I worked like an animal at the time, and Alicia knows that, because many times she has to deal with my youngest son at the time, like many other friends. I will say I never feel alone because I have my community that support me all those years. But my life is a life of struggle and betrayed. Betrayed by my own family when 2 of my aunts denounced me. Betrayed by Carmen Gloria Quintana, which was a girl that was born alive with Rodrigo. She was somebody from a poor neighborhood with no resources of any sort and no knowledge, because there was kind of people that didn't want to do anything because they didn't want to suffer. That happened to many. And with the attorney of the Solidarity of the church, you know, she works. They betray me in the sense that we have a first trial that was made by the military court, and the military court rejected the case, saying that they were responsible, and in fact they put the responsibility on her, saying that she was responsible of them being burned. But they joined with this man that is the husband of Carmen Gloria, Juan Enrique Campos. And to speak about this is very hard, very, very hard. Even I spoke many times. I don't know why I choose English. But Carmen Gloria, Juan Enrique Campos, Héctor Salazar Ardiles, the attorney that's supposed to be defending us, they joined with one of Pinochet's Minister of Justice, which is the same minister that freed Presidente Piñera, which was with order of arrest for being stealing a bank, Banco Talca. And what they agree, even the judgment was against the case. They agreed that Carmen Gloria would receive a compensation, monetary compensation, if everything relating to the case disappeared. And also, since she agreed, the case, Mónica Madariaga, the former minister of Pinochet, paid her the university, because at that moment she was the director of Universidad Andrés Bello, and she paid the title she got as a as a psychologist. Now she's a doctor. She traveled having fun all over the world. She never did anything for the case. I worked 20 years by myself because whenever I went and whenever I went to do something, I was always finding door closes because Carmen Gloria's situation was solved. It's like the death of my son was nothing. All the struggles of years. I also started trial here in the United States, and also I was betrayed again. And I was betrayed by the doctors of the attorneys of human rights here, which after Chile gave an award as a human rights attorney. And the reason he betrayed me was because the new government, Patricia Aylwin, which also was involved in the coup d'etat, need to be helped to start a new democracy. I can talk a lot about all these things, but my story is a story of a struggle and betrayal. As simple as that. And when I start, and I said I will start by the end, I'm 75 years old. I still without have justice. And I know I won't have justice. And my fear is that my dream is leaving Chile, and I cannot live in there. I won't have the sources. But what is worse, to give something of our struggle to my kids and my family and the community, to everybody that is being so involved in this case. I will die. No. And if I die, Rodrigo won't get justice. We have a first judgment last year in April. But we have 2 more steps. Because I appeal, because I was agreeing with part of the judgment, which is declared that this was a crime committed by members of the armed forces. But I disagree with the others, the penalties that they gave to the criminals. The criminals still free. Rodrigo's death, 34 years. He was 19 years old when he was burned alive. My son Pablo was 12, and Rodrigo was more than a brother. He was a friend, was a brother, who was taking care of him when I was working or when I was studying. Because when we were doing solidarity work, they were with me everywhere. But the only thing, I'm poor, so I don't have money to give to my kids to live a place where they could live or anything like that. The only thing I can give to them is justice for his brother. Because it will be a way to get back some dignity. There are too many issues. There are too many problems. I'm a political person. and over 60 years of active political life. Nobody will stop me. I'm very clear that that's my life. Adriana was talking about how the people was so irrational, so insensitive, blaming her. In Chile happened the same thing, and also here. It's time you live your life. But my life is being destroyed so many times. I have been betrayed so many times. When I remember the faces of the two women when Rodrigo was been alive, the two of my aunts that were there at the Chilean Commission of Human Rights, where he was I forgot the term, but como el velorio, no? They were crying. If I knew that they were responsible for my arrest, I don't know if I will contempt. Like, I'm always contempt. Because I cannot understand to be so pitiful, so little as a human being, that you don't think on the consequences of what you do to the others. And I think all of us, in different ways. When Adriana Portillo was talking, I just want to hug her because I know what she's been through. And I know how much she is been through. When I hear Anahí, and Anahí, I know you through Alicia for many years. And I know how much she loved you. When I hear Malu talking with all the difficulty, and you know, with the experience of what I have been seeing and a struggle for Latin America, I tell you, never allow the government to keep lying. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because our truth is our strength.
Ay, Verónica, es un broche de oro, es un broche de oro para cerrar esto. Te dije varias veces que, bueno, te quiero abrazar también, estás muy lejos, y yo creo que esto de
Yo las abrazo a todas.
Esto de la emoción es porque no nos vemos las carotas y no nos
We
podemos.
see each other in the faces, but we can't give each other a hug.
I'm sorry. I'm saying that that she gave she closed in a very strong note, and that I want to hug her, and I want to, and she said she wants to hug everybody. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to interrupt you here.
I understand.
Yeah, and now I'm gonna thank you, Veronica, for the strength and for the inspiration all these years. I'm gonna introduce the latest person I've met that inspires me, Ram Kumar Bhandari. I met him in Nepal. He has led the struggle to secure justice for victims and survivors in Nepal. He has over a decade experience working with marginalized communities, in particular the families of the disappeared, victims and survivors of conflict, ex-combatant youth, ethnic minorities, rural youth, and women groups. Ram's activism began when his own father disappeared in 2001. In the years since, he has pioneered many new techniques of grassroots mobilization, campaigning, and networking. Ram helped to launch the community radio station, the Network of Families of the Disappeared, the Committee for Social Justice, and the Conflict Victims Common Platform for Transitional Justice. He has also submitted petitions to the UN Human Rights Committee, the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, and the Nepali Supreme Court. Ram has written extensively on victims' rights and nonviolent conflict in English and Nepali. He is a PhD candidate at Nova School of Law in Lisbon. Bienvenido, welcome. Ram is gonna summarize the strategies that he's been listening to and he knows about.
Thank you, Alicia. It's a very emotional and powerful presentation by all the speakers. Let me begin with the note made by Adriana Metz that she said, it's not only my parents disappeared, it's a story of all of us. This is all of our common stories that, what you share. And then we all are emotionally attached, and then listening your stories, it's very moving and powerful. And so that's why I would say this is our emotional attachment, and then we all are speaking together for justice. And then this is our collective voice to the world that where are our disappeared relatives? And so I think the pain, wherever we are and then wherever we live, the pain doesn't go away, and the suffering continues at different level. And it's a long journey for all of us, and the fight is very hard and becoming more harder. And so that's why we need collaboration, and then we need sharing. We need to tell our stories that, everyone wants to tell their stories that, we have been telling to the world, telling to the next generation, like, the legacy of grandmothers and mothers of Plaza de Mayo are now and then HIJOS, the children's of the children's and the grandchildren's are carrying the legacy of the Argentine disappearance to the world. These are the things. I think I'm so touched with all the personal stories and experiences that, you have been suffering through, and then you have been experiencing at a different part of the world. And so let's keep moving forward to source for truth and justice. This is very important wherever we are. I think that in the presentation, and then it's so touched all the time, I have no comments, and then I have no other words to make remarks on your notes. This is very emotional, very powerful, and very moving. But the main important thing to me is that, we are still speaking out. We still have courage. We still have power to speak out. And this is our collective strength together. And so I really thank Alicia to bring all the real, organic family members together. And then I think that in our, different strategies that, you have been adopting to speak out, the most important thing is our personal story and our personal source process, that how we are becoming part of the collective source campaign, like in different countries, that even this is our, when we summarize, this is our personal story from very emotional suffering to collective activism, that where we stand today. And then we have our family associations speaking for the many thousands of families. And then this is our long battle that, we have adopted different strategies, legal battle. We went through, various legal battle at home and abroad to the United Nations level. And then this is a political fight that, I mean, we have been politically questioning about the political accountability. And then this is our part of our social intervention modality also. We have been engaging through social and economic change process. We have been engaging through political change processes, and then keeping our question to the government's accountability, that the role of governments, the role of state institutions, including truth commissions and inquiry commissions, the role of perpetrators who still serve in position, for example, from Nepal, that, I mean, there are many perpetrators that, I mean, those, I mean, who are directly involved in my father's disappearance, they still serve in positions. That's a big threat and obstacle in our justice processes in different parts of the world. And the role of various justice actors. We have heard a lot about transitional justice and justice actors, including, I mean, donors, NGOs, international NGOs, and the United Nations actors. Also, they have not supported a lot to the families, those who live in rural part of Africa, Latin America, or in Asia, and in our part. They are not supporting us. They are doing their own business. They are producing and reproducing victims at different times. But the real families, they never received support, and they never received justice. Like just our colleague said that I'm 75 years old without justice. This is, I mean, what's the, I mean, a reality today is that, I mean, we have been suffering through. There is no justice. There is no process. And then these all actors, including governments and the United Nations, they haven't seen the role of families. They haven't recognized the role of family association, how they fought for. And so these are the obstacles I see. So their role must be reviewed. And then we need a reorientation in our justice process and campaign. And so that's why, like, I mean, we have been doing all family members around the world, and then we have been commemorating, and then we have been remembering our disappeared relatives. We know, we understand that the loss of the family members, how we feel, how it, we grieve ourselves, and we understand the pain. That's why, I mean, many families, including ourselves, we have been involved in the local memorialization process, and then we have been engaging through forensic search process, engaging through different processes, I mean, including telling our stories and documenting histories. These are important for us. And also, these all can be, I mean, different strategies of our advocacy. That's why we individually or with our association, our strength is, I mean, advocacy, speaking out and telling our stories to other people. And then individually or collectively, these are our powers. And then when we see our individual or collective activism, I think our origin, our objectives, and our purpose is similar. We want truth, we want justice, and then we want to change the I mean, state denial process, that, I mean, the level of, I mean, and impunity, how they are killing our justice process. These are very important for all families. I think we have a very limited time, and then let me finish with my short intervention with the I mean, what Veronica stated very clearly, that don't be afraid. Our truth is our strength. That I would repeat it again, and we are speaking for truth, and then we are speaking for justice, and then to keeping our legacy and with us, and then let's continue our struggle, and then let's support each other. And so I share my strength to you, and then we'll continue our struggle. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you, everybody.
See,
Love you.
it's 5 in the morning. It's 5:30 in the morning in Nepal, and Ram got up very early to be with us, and now you know why. I wanted to bring Ram to Argentina. He is doing research on the relatives, how the families organize in Nepal, South Africa, and Argentina. And he knows as much as probably I know about all what you are doing all over. So that's when the pandemic leaves us alone, we are gonna have to give big hugs to each other. So I was supposed to summarize, but I think Ram summarized quite a bit. The only thing that I want to say is these women in Ram are very humble, and they have not really said all what they have done. I mean, they talk in general terms, they talk about their movements, but as individuals, and they have worked so hard. And it's not only telling the story, they have testified in courts of law. They have been almost killed. Like Malu was almost, you know, they killed her bodyguard. And I mean, it's not, they have risked their lives. Veronica has risked their life so many times. Anahí lives in the middle of a city where it was very dangerous to speak up. I mean, all of you are so extraordinarily brave and courageous. When I was in Nepal, there was a moment in which they were disappearing people, and the newspapers were not reporting that. And Ram came to see me, traveling like 2 hours, just because he wanted to make contact with me, and to be able to organize our links, our connections, and he risked his life. And so it's all of you are very dear to me. Let's see what the audience wants to ask us. Vamos a ver, okay, so if you have questions, you want to write them in the chat. For the Facebook live, if you, Jasmine, thank you, Jasmine, for being there for us. You were gonna type us questions, and I'll address them to the participants. And I'm expecting something in the chat, and I don't know, there is, okay. There are no Facebook questions in Spanish. Keith, are there any Facebook questions in English?
No.
Wow. So are people there in Facebook?
Not on my side, no.
Oh, that's probably a glitch in the system, because there were a lot of people who wanted to be there. But okay, so people were sending hugs. People were sending fraternal hugs. That's what people were doing in Facebook. And then, so no questions. I'm waiting for a minute or two. People are saying, let's see, I'm gonna read some comments.
Alicia, just I mean, one thing to share to friends in this forum that, and we have been working a lot to form a international network to bring all victims and survivors together. Alicia, and a big team, we have been engaging to form a network. Now, I mean, we have finalized all our charter, names, logo, everything is ready, called International Network of Victims and Survivors of Serious Human Rights Abuses. We are preparing to launch it soon. Innovas. We are launching it soon, and we'll then inform you all soon. And maybe Alicia will inform, and then we'll be there together to fight for international justice.
I want, yeah, we're going to invite all of them to be part of this network. I hope they can. Okay, there is a message here. Hugs from Liliana Ortiz. Okay, Monica wants Ram to explain a bit more about the situation in your country.
Okay. In Nepal now, and before the current situation, we had 10 years armed conflict from 1996 to 2006. We had a peace agreement signed in 2006. After that, we entered into transitional phase. And then in political transition, we experienced a lot of exploitation, lots of problems and challenges. And then we had 2 Constitution Assembly election in 2008 and 2013. And then we had a new constitution in 2015 finally. And government formed 2 commission, Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Disappeared Commission. They are still in action, but I mean without delivery, without result, because they never consulted with victims and survivors, and then they didn't work for them, because this is and heavily controlled by the perpetrators at the top level. They are based in the capital as a government institution, but not working with the wider families at public level. This is the situation with the commission process. Commissions are both stalled and then useless for the wider victims. And at other level, the level of impunity is very deep rooted, because in the Nepal case, most of the perpetrators are known. They are in Nepal army, they are in Nepal police, some are in political parties, so they are in parliament, and then they are in government. That's the reason that, and then so now people are not speaking out strongly. And so there are a lot of threats for the activists. Government is very not friendly. We have so many things in paper, but not in practice. And so there are very few limited vocal activists right now. But we are, adapting different strategies to counter the government. And then at some level, we are participating and critically engaging with government institutions. We are partnering with the local government at some places. And then we are also working on a local memorialization process to mobilize family members, and also partnering with the wider civil society groups, women groups, and then local youth clubs and media, civil society organization is a part of social intervention modality that I have been adopting in my hometown. Like, for example, I'm working with the local government, working with the teachers association, working with the students union, women groups, local cooperatives. And then that means that gives us not only social solidarity, but also a social protection, because the government institution, they are not supporting us, and the security institution are threatening us, because they still serve their position, and then we are naming them. We are naming and shaming the perpetrators. And then we have been closely working with the National Human Rights Commissions. They recently published a list of perpetrators at the end, and government is so angry with that, and security forces, they are not happy with that. They are not implementing, but they are recommending. But those names are public now, and then we can use in our national advocacy. We are also filing some cases to use the international law in the United Nations Human Rights Committee that we have been doing, and also using our Supreme Court, using our local courts. That's just a legal battle, not directly supporting to the families, but we have been cooperating with the family members also, because we are also concerned on our livelihood, concerned on our social life, and then concerned with our economic life and memorialization. We are linking livelihood and memory to also bring family members together, and also to strengthen our advocacy and continue our struggle. This is the situation in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ram. Now, Irene Martinez, who is a doctor and a former political prisoner.
Prisoner from Argentina.
She's asking, how we take care of our health, our physical, mental, and emotional health, because the struggle is long.
Speaking.
Malu? And Veronica, go ahead. What I can say personally is what we do when we accompany victims' families. When we accompany victims' families, we always try to support them by helping to provide psychological therapy and helping them to process their grief. So we help the families in that way. Personally, also, I can say both my mother and myself have never really had psychological therapy or emotional therapy. It's hard for us, well, personally, to feel like I'm going to a psychologist is like a luxury of dealing with my emotions, when all of that anger and emotions is something that I can channel to continue looking for justice and to help other families. At some point, it does affect you. We have tried to we get depressed sometimes. My son actually has had some serious depression and has had to be hospitalized. We have another colleague who has had to have psychiatric attention for months. And what happens is that if you don't deal with things at the time, and if you say your emotional situation isn't important, with time it accumulates and creates more of an impact. Unfortunately, when a tragedy like this happens, something that's happened to a daughter or a son, or in my case, my sister, what you think, the last thing you're going to think about is going to therapy. What you're thinking about and what you're focusing on is this search for justice. And when you find other families who are like you and that they haven't been heard by public officials, it's also really hard for us to get them to accept that therapy might be a good idea, because for them it's more important to spend the whole day with the public ministry to find out how the investigation is going, or to go to a kind of an action looking for their children than going to therapy. And so then depression can get very severe, and it's harder just to stand up and keep struggling. So I'm speaking personally that for me it's been hard to accept therapy, and I still haven't had therapy, even though I recognize that I need it. But I still have as a priority the need to support other families or my children and my nephews, my sister's children. Thank you, Malu. Verónica?
A ver, ¿en español o en inglés?
Can I speak in Spanish?
Yeah, I will do it in Spanish. Primero, en términos de cuidado,
Well, first of all, in terms of care,
yo no soy partidario de tener un
I
guardia.
really don't want to have a bodyguard.
Les voy a decir por qué.
I'm going to
Porque
tell you why.
la gente, en general, lo que yo he
Because
observado,
in
las
general,
personas
what I've been able to see
que van con alguien, un guardia personal,
is the
esas
people
personas
who have
vidas.
bodyguards
A mí me da mucha más seguridad y no expongo
aren't
a una
as safe.
tercera persona a correr riesgo, caminar sola. Y yo salgo y
I
nunca
would
sé por qué
rather
calle
go
voy
out
a ir.
by myself.
No me gusta tener yo claro los caminos que voy a tomar.
And I don't
Los voy tomando en el
necessarily
momento.
even trace out my path ahead of time.
Ahora, en términos conversando esto con
Yeah, you were talking about
algunas
security and not health, I guess.
compañeras que
But
han tenido sus guardias personales,
talking to some of
me
my
han dicho
companions
de
who've
que
had personal bodyguards,
están totalmente de acuerdo porque cuando
they've
ellos
told me that
han tenido
they
a alguien,
totally agree
no tienen paz. Cuando alguien se acerca a saludarlas,
because it's really hard.
Empieza un cuestionamiento a esa otra persona que se acerca. Entonces, no me gusta exponer a nadie. Eso es una cosa. Con respecto a salud mental,
In terms of mental health,
cuando yo llegué aquí, yo sufría mucho
when I arrived here, I suffered a lot
de los riñones. Sigo sufriendo, pero
from my kidneys. I continue to have problems with it.
después de la muerte de Rodrigo empezó otro problema que es la tiroides.
Yeah, but I had other problems after Rodrigo died with my thyroid.
Me acuerdo que cada 6 meses, todos
I
los 11 de
remember
septiembre,
that every 6 months,
y
in
todos los 8 de marzo, yo
every
iba
September 8th and March 8th,
el día 8 de marzo, ¿no es cierto?, el Día Internacional de la Mujer,
and I
que es
know
como
March
empezar
8th
el
is
año
International Women's
político
Day,
en contra de la dictadura.
and that's a big day for protesting against the dictatorship too.
De nuevos detenidos, de nuevos crímenes. Entonces,
There's always
uno se hacía
new
pedazos.
crimes and new bad things that
Y
happen, so
el 11
it
de septiembre era
tears you
exactamente
apart.
para revivir el golpe de Estado y todas las consecuencias que
So
uno había
it's,
hasta ese
you end up reliving the time of the coup and everything that happened to you at the time.
Entonces, todos los marzo y todos los
So
septiembre yo
every
pasaba
March and every
piedras
September,
al riñón.
I end up with kidney stones
Ahí terminaba en el hospital.
and I end up in the hospital.
Entonces, los médicos, desgraciadamente, que tuve la mala suerte de tener
Fortunately, I had
para que me cuidaran, me acuerdo de que el médico que me atendía
I
en ese
remember that
momento
the doctor who was treating me at the time
me mandó a hacer diálisis.
had me do dialysis.
Yo tenía 33 años.
I was 33 years old.
Y una amiga me habló del médico que tengo hasta ahora.
A friend told me about a better doctor that I have now.
Que es un psiquiatra de Harvard, no es
It's a psychiatrist from Harvard.
cualquiera. Su nombre es James Gordon.
His name is James Gordon.
Y él nunca me presionó para que yo hablara.
And he never pressured me to talk.
Lo que me daba era una dieta y me ponía las
He
agujas.
put me on a diet and we did some acupuncture.
Y ahí aprendí que los problemas de rodilla y
what I understood was that my problems with my knee and my problems with my kidney had to do with fear and with pain.
Entonces, me dio formas naturales. Por ejemplo,
so he gave me natural
en vez de tomar una droga para el dolor,
yoga for pain,
ponerme hielo y hacerme masajes con
ice and massage with special oils.
Y bueno, y una dieta especial.
And a special diet.
Y puras vitaminas y bueno, suplementos.
All the vitamins and supplements that I
Esto lo
needed.
estoy haciendo desde el año 80.
So I've been doing that since 1980 until now.
Hace 40 años que estoy haciendo esta dieta.
I've been on this special diet for 40 years.
Puedo decir de que en general estoy mucho mejor que
and I
muchas
can say
personas
in general, I'm a lot better.
Y viajo mucho, sobre todo cuando estoy en Chile, porque me gusta ir a los
especially when I'm in Chile. So I like to go to the small towns and talk with young people.
Porque la so llamada democracia les ha prohibido también la historia, no solo fue el dictador.
Because they don't necessarily know about the history. The dictatorship has kept stories from being told and history from being taught.
Pero no solo fue el dictador, la nueva democracia.
But not just the dictatorship, the new democracy is that way also.
O sea, para mí, una dictadura dibujada, digamos.
Gracias.
So
Thank you, Verónica.
Entonces,
We are going to be cut soon because we have people.
entonces, eso es lo que me refiero. Yo creo de que, como Armalú decía, hay mucha necesidad, pero yo la entiendo plenamente.
Maru
Porque
has
yo,
said
por
there's a
ejemplo,
lot of need, and I do understand that.
Cuando murió mi hijo, a mí me
Because when
criticaron
my
mucho,
son died, I was criticized a great
porque
deal
yo no lloré. Y yo no lloré porque sabía que
because
si
I didn't
lloraba,
cry. And I knew that if I started crying, I'd never stop. That's why I didn't cry.
y el crimen era tan poderoso
And the
que tenía
crime was
que dejar toda la energía
so
para ver
powerful
cómo iba a enfrentar esa
that I
lucha
had to
que
use
ya llevo
all
34
of my
años.
energy just to engage in the struggle that I've been involved in now for so long.
Eso es lo que puedo decir.
That's what I can say.
Y no creo en los médicos, de verdad.
But I don't believe in the doctors.
Gordon es muy especial. Keith, do we have a few more minutes? Keith?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go 10 more minutes. But, and I have a question from several questions from David Gonzalez. Thank you. He's asking, it has been said that change comes from a pen because the pen is mightier than the sword. What are some of your favorite writers that influenced you?
Famous writers that influenced me? Nobody influenced me.
Para todos, ¿sí? The question is for everybody. It's not only for you, Verónica.
No, I know, but it's
for everybody. and maybe some of
Yo
them.
leo mucho, entre esa a ti, pero en realidad.
I'm fishing for that. She says she likes me. We're gonna write our book, Verónica.
No, me gustan los latinoamericanos, me fascinan.
¿Alguien? Somebody wants to answer this?
I can say I haven't been inspired by any specific writer for the work that I've been doing. What has been inspired me is my mother. She's a teacher and a writer, and other mothers, to see the strength, and especially when I hear Veronica and others talking about the strength that they have as mothers for truth and justice, and to see that each day they get up and they continue with their lives in spite of many years looking for justice. They continue with this hope to find this justice, to find this truth. That's what motivates me. Not just the assassination of my sister, but to see the strength and the will of these mothers to search for their daughters, their children, how they can focus on their homes, to have work, to have activities, and in spite of all of this, to have the space to continue searching for and helping other families. They suffer this loss and this pain, and I feel that the mothers are my inspiration, because whenever there's a mother who's crying, this is where I'm going to be focusing my attention as long as I'm alive. There are writers whose work I like Sergio Gonzalez. That was the first book that I read, was the topic of bones in the desert. He was the first. Then it was Adriana Washington with her book on the Harvest of Women, excellent book, and other wonderful writers. But my inspiration is the mothers. I confess, I'm in literature is the strongest source of strength for me is the mother's strength and their struggle. Adriana Portillo, did you have the hand raised? I didn't realize it. Do you want to say something? I wanted to share my experience with respect to how to take care of mental health. I was born and raised in Guatemala, and I grew and was nursed by my mother with fear and terror because Guatemala was in this struggle for so many years. And while I was in Guatemala, when the kidnapping of my family occurred, when people asked me where my family members, I lied and I said they were in Mexico. And I believed that lie. I firmly believed it. And it wasn't until I came to the United States, I heard myself saying this. My father, my daughters of 10 and 9 years were kidnapped and disappeared by the state. And from that point on, I started my struggle literally to survive, not just emotionally, but physically to survive. For years, I attempted suicide 2 or 3 times because I couldn't handle the loss and the pain. It was too much. And now where I live, I found a center. It was the first center that treated survivors of torture in the United States. And this center started with a support group of survivors of torture from Guatemala. This was the most difficult that I could have experienced, to face this lie that I had created, and to accept that my family, in particular my 2 daughters, had been disappeared. This meant that I was never going to see them again, neither alive nor dead. And I started to self-medicate myself with alcohol and other things until finally I decided that I needed to see a psychologist. I never wanted to see male psychologists. I always preferred to see women. And I started. At first, it was very difficult for me because I said, this is the culture of my country. I'm not crazy. I don't need to see a psychologist. I'm not crazy. I'm healthy. But it's true, I wasn't crazy. But I had such a heavy emotional and psychological load that I alone was not able to manage. And since 1988, different psychologists from this center have worked with me, and psychiatrists as well. And based on my experience, I can say, if it hadn't been for this support and this work that people did with me and that I did with them, of course, I would not be alive. I can affirm that. I also had to take medicine for depression and insomnia because since my family members were disappeared, I lost the ability to sleep. And I sleep only with the help of pharmaceuticals. But I can say this type of work saved my life, saved my life. And also having my 2 surviving daughters and my husband who've always been there for me. But in my personal case, it's a psychological therapy, working with a psychiatrist, it saved me. That's what I can say. How are you going to live knowing what happened and not want to die? Without work of psychologists and the psychiatrists, I wouldn't be here. Thank you. Thank you for this testimony, your strength, your trust in us, and for telling us in this with so much courage. We are going to close this conversation, my first conversation, because we talked about it as panels or something else, forums. I want to applaud all of you, all of the participants, and a big hug to all of you. I love you all. It's been wonderful to be able to hear one another. There's greetings from Italy, Roberto's in Italy, people who are here from Argentina. Good night and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, until forever. Thank you, Alicia. Organize another and I won't cry.
Thank you.
Thank
And we'll
you.
talk about happy things. I
Thank you.
want cake for the next one. This one forgot my quinceañera. He forgot my quinceañera. 40 years after he was celebrating in Italy with a
Alicia,
giant roast. He's a political prisoner and a companion. No, no, aquí estamos.
dile Evita que parte de mi salud mental.
Thank you to the
Sí, gracias.
interpreter. We have to close. I want to know the anecdote. Where are you? Tell us, tell us. The 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Maybe we'll share it in private. That would be better. Anybody who wants to know, it's on Facebook. It's recorded. And there's Antonio. Are you there still? I don't know. I robbed his computer for me, and Malu says I shared. I stole my daughter's. Ah, here we are. Hello.
Chao, chao.
And there they are.
¿A dónde
Hi,
están
Ramon.
mis niñas?
Where are my girls? Hi, Chris. My students are still. Oh, you can go. You can go. You've spent so much time here. Thank you, Nicole, for being here. We're going to let the interpreters go who worked really hard this evening. Bye, Janessa. Bye, Ramón.
Tenemos que vernos. ¿Cuántos años? ¿Sabes quién está, Eva? Morrón y Anís están aquí. Marrón y Anís. Sí, a ver. Bueno, me voy. Chao.
Chao, chao.
Carmen, besos. Un gusto y un placer conocerlas a todos, Anahí, Verónica,
Igualmente.
ambas Adrianas. Saludos, un honor conocerlas y escuchar sus historias.
Igualmente, igualmente.
Igual, pues.
Cuenten conmigo, ahí estamos en el correo electrónico, en lo que puedan y apoyar en difusión, cuenten conmigo.
Me parece muy buena idea.
Yo soy malísima para escribir, así que... Pero vamos a ver. Uno nunca sabe.